Hey there, it's JVL here with the Bulwarks, Andrew Egger. Andrew, over the weekend, we had the eruption of a fight between Elon Musk and Steve Bannon, and it was glorious to behold. I don't need, like, we need all of the gifts. We need the let them fight gif. We need the worst person you know just is right gif. All of the gifts that exist in the meme verse. But I'm Team Bannon. How about you?
So it's a weird thing. It's a weird thing. Like you didn't necessarily expect the coalition to break down quite this quickly, even though obviously Steve Bannon has had an axe to grind with Elon Musk in particular for a few years. But so I feel like we're all kind of like caught a little bit napping. It's like, oh wait, the MAGA coalition that was seemed so ascendant is already kind of splintering a little bit, and I
They
guess we
hate
all have
each
to
other.
take sides about it. Yeah, I mean it's very well. It's interesting because like the main thing this coalition exists to do is to beat up on Democrats when Democrats are in power, right? I mean,
Right.
that's not Trump's big political aim, but that's the political strength of the movement because it's all reverse polarization against the Democrats. Um, and and it just turns out it falls apart more quickly even than I think we would have imagined. But yeah, like you said, you're Team Bannon. I'm here to kind of argue the side of Elon Musk in this whole thing. But you wrote your newsletter about it today, so can you just like lay out a little bit of in this fight between these two guys, why it is that maybe your sympathies lie more with Steve?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a bunch of reasons. First of all, Bannon is what in Dungeons and Dragons, which is not something you had a lot of experience with in your youth, I don't believe. Correct me if I'm just making assumptions.
I did play a little Dungeons and Dragons in high
You
school. Yeah,
did. Oh, good for
yeah,
you.
I did.
Good for
I also
you.
played guitar.
Parents weren't worried that you were going to hell for doing the demon game.
We can talk about that later. I have a whole bunch of stories. Let's stick to
I
the
bet.
topic at hand.
So, Steve Bannon would be lawful evil. And what that means is, he's a bad guy, but he's got a code. And he adheres to the code. Elon Musk is chaotic evil, right? Steve Bannon has been doing this for at this point 20 years. And he's got a thing. He hates immigrants. He wants to shut down immigration. He wants to do isolationism in American foreign policy. He wants to do more domestic manufacturing. And he wants to punish the wokes. He hates liberals and he wants to tear down, elite institutions. If he's got to break some laws while he does it, he's not going to lose any sleep. Elon Musk has been doing this for 5 minutes. He started paying attention to politics 5 minutes ago. And since then, he's decided that climate change is the most important thing in the world, and then that AI is the most important thing in the world, then that fertility rates are the most important thing in the world, then that the woke mind virus is the most important thing in the world. He just ping pongs from thing to thing, and he makes up new positions. And who can say whether or not he's using ketamine? This is a big question. Nobody knows.
Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I would say if someone has depression issues, they should consider talking to their doctor about ketamine instead of SSRIs.
I mean, this is a 53-year-old dude who seems to maybe be paying people to play Diablo for him so that he can then go on to Twitch streams and claim to be the 9th best Diablo player in the world. What in the world? What's going on? It's absolutely nuts. And the extent to which Elon does seem to be motivated by nothing but rent seeking, right? If you look at the through line for his life, there is nothing but rent seeking. He's just going from subsidy to subsidy, and he'll suck up to anybody if there's money in it for him and his companies. And so, he's soft on China, he's soft on Russia, he's soft on everybody. And he's out there being a welfare queen in America, looking for tax breaks. And yeah, I just Musk is a bad guy in the oligarchical sense. He wants to be God Emperor of the solar system. And I don't think that you can A, trust him with anything, and B, I think that if Musk was actually allowed to be in charge of some real power for a year, it would be really bad for America. But with Bannon, if you squint real hard, you can see a domesticated version of what his populism would be like. That would be okay. Not all of it, but portions of it, you're like, okay, that wouldn't give us like optimal outcomes. but like that's a thing we could basically live with, kind of.
Do you think
And
a
I just don't think
domesticated
that's
version
true.
of Steve Bannon, is that a guy who wears fewer collared shirts, or does that one
No
layer
more
even
than
more
4.
on?
No
Okay.
more than 4 collars in the domesticated
Yeah.
version of Steve Bannon. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was batting this question around in my mind because, you know, your newsletter prompted me to think about it. Like, I mean, like, again, who's the least worst guy who could be whispering in Trump's ear at any given moment? I think it's an interesting
Yeah.
question, right? The thing that gives me a little bit of pause, and I do buy big chunks of your argument. The thing that gives me a little bit of pause is like thinking about Elon Musk's political evolution, right? Thinking about the way that he went from a guy who was just kind of zany and arrogant and obviously had a gigantic head, but was just kind of limiting himself to, you know, being a god of tech, right? Like being in that space, and the way that he himself kind of radicalized, I think, on a personal level over the last few years into a guy who paid more and more attention to the political discourse, and then was just kind of living in it constantly and posting about it way more than any human being ever ought to. And then ultimately, because he had all this money sitting around, was able to sort of leverage that into suddenly making himself one of the most important people in politics. I mean, Michael Michael Bloomberg must be green with envy over that. But the thing that makes me push back, if we're specifically comparing these guys, Musk and Bannon, I think a big part of what happened to Elon Musk has a lot to do with Steve Bannon. Not so much with his ideological program that you were laying out a minute ago, but sort of the bigger contribution that Steve Bannon has made to the MAGA movement in general, which is to kind of give it a theory of media, right? Of what political persuasion is, of how MAGA wins in kind of the popular consciousness. And this has been a big thing for Bannon for years, right? I mean, his very famous quote from Trump's first term is that, you know, you don't need to beat the Democrats, you beat the media, you need to beat the media. And the way you beat the media is by flooding the zone with shit. We've all said that phrase a million times, right? Because the theory is if you can just ruin everybody's media diet, if you can ruin everybody's kind of information stream, then you can beat down their ability to distinguish truth from lies. You can destroy their social trust. You can turn the whole nation into, you know, political paranoids. And that ultimately plays to the benefit of the kind of iconoclastic populist movement with a figurehead like Donald Trump, who then can accumulate all this power and, you know, put the program into place that guys like Steve Bannon want or whatever. But what's interesting when you're talking about these two guys is that that's kind of exactly what has happened to Elon Musk, right? Like when you talk about Musk's, Musk does not share that theory of persuasion. Musk is almost like sort of childlike in a way when he talks about political stuff, right? He has this this like totally unearned and naive, like kind of cloud cuckoo land sense where he's like, you're the media now. We're brushing all those guys out of the way, all the interests, special groups, all the elites, all of the newspaper guys and everything like that. We're making them irrelevant. And what's going to rise to the surface is this beautiful, beautiful discourse and argument and persuasion and all the real facts. And the truth is going to come out and it's going to flourish, right? I mean, it's a very different kind of way of looking at things than what Steve Bannon has. But at the same time, he is a guy who has had his brain hooked up to like the Bannon machine for years and has completely cooked his own mind. I mean, like he's just some of it's just being online, right? Like it's the attention span stuff that you were talking about before. But I mean, he's a guy who like now has completely lost any ability to like distinguish conspiracy theory from reality of anything that comes across his own feed. And I think we see a lot of the political damage of that. And I guess the point that I'm making is a lot of the real harms that a guy like Elon presents and a lot of the real dangers that come from having him be like a central figure in our politics are sort of downstream from the Steve Bannon way of organizing the world to try to turn everybody in America into one of those lunatics.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's not wrong exactly, but there's more going on here. I mean, Bannon has to be authentically populist in the sense that he's got to find things that can have broad support, whereas Elon will just claim to be a populist and then try to manipulate the results. So like, there's a famous thing he would do. He'd like, I'll do this when he first took over Twitter. What do you think? Should I do this thing? I'll post a poll for an hour. And then, if he didn't get the results he wanted at the end of the hour, he'd be like, I'm going to extend this poll for another 24 hours and we'll see what happened, or he'd go in and monkey with the results himself. And so there is a I mean, Elon is not a Vox Populi, Vox Dei guy, right? He is a Vox Elon, Vox Dei guy, and that's what he wants. And Bannon doesn't operate in that way, and it's because Bannon is fundamentally an underdog, right? And has always been an underdog. He is a rebel, and so he wears that well and understands that in order to he's got to create something that can actually find traction in the world. Elon is the opposite. And one of the things that's funny to me, Elon may wind up being the richest guy in the history of humanity. I mean, he's not there yet, but he could wind up having more money than anybody has ever actually had. And he's trying to position himself as the underdog guy. And that's insane. Right? I mean, it is utterly insane that he sees himself as this scrappy. I mean, he's not. He was born rich. He's gotten richer. He may wind up the richest guy ever. And because of that being the posture he operates out of, this is a guy who wants to be king of the world, in a way that Bannon doesn't. Bannon's ambitions are structural. Elon's are personal.
Yeah, and it is interesting. Like when you talk about Elon, I think part of it is just that like it's a little bit like talking about Trump, where it's like so much of it comes down to what you are imagining is actually kind of going on between his ears, right? Because so many of his actions are kind of like inscrutable and weird and open to interpretation. I think like you can sketch out a compelling case that Elon is a guy who is more calculating and more cynical than he lets on to be. And a lot of people argue this, that like all this ultimately comes down to, cozying up to power so that he can protect his business interests in China or things like that. I mean, like there are theories of this. I don't know if I find them all that persuasive. I mean, I think Elon ultimately, the more you kind of just like mainline his stuff, the more he kind of comes across as a guy who is like supremely confident in his own powers and his own ideas and all that stuff, but is also kind of furtive and wounded seeming and very impulsive in kind of the moves he makes. And again, like we keep coming back to sort of the attention span, but he does not carry himself like a person who has much of a plan. Like he's not like, I'm gonna read, I'm gonna really brush up on these 6 fields in the year of our Lord 2025, and it's grooming gangs in Great Britain, and it's the new spending bill and the importance of stopping that instantly. I mean, he really is like kind of enslaved to the algorithm in a way that
his own trending topics. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, he has hooked himself up to his own machine. And I don't know, like so I think when you see him as that kind of guy, you can almost see him as like kind of a tragic figure in some ways, where he has all this success and he has all this ambition. And I think a lot of his stated, again, kind of like naive ideals are things that he sincerely believes he believes, right? It's just that he is also like such an appetite and such an undisciplined guy in some weird ways, that anytime those things bang off of like, speed bumps or his ego or things like that, he kind of brushes them out of the way, which is kind of what you were alluding to before. I don't know how you stack that up against a guy like Bannon, who I don't really know. I don't really know how to assess him personally on the same way, but can't they just both suck, JVL? I don't know. I mean, it's like, ideally they will eat one another, and only the fingernails and the tips of their tails will be left or whatever.
People say that, right? There's the expression like, well, it's the Iran-Iraq war. Who are you going to root for? And the answer is, in the Iran-Iraq war, we and the rest of the civilized world all rooted for Iraq. Like, Saddam Hussein's Iraq was not a great place. Saddam was a very, very bad guy. But compared to the mullahs, they were much, much less destabilizing. And it wasn't even close. Even the Russians. I mean, this is, in a weird way, the Americans and the Russians and the French and the Saudis and the rest of the Gulf were all on Iraq's side. The Iranians had the North Koreans. That was their coalition partner. So, I think we can root for one. I want to ask you, before we get out, I want to ask you a question about Elon. Do you think in any part of Elon's mind, there is a node which is contemplating becoming president? Because I kind of do. I think there is a tiny little recess. It's not on active right now. It's in sleep mode. It's in passive mode. But I think there's a part of him which is thinking, well, maybe I should just be president. Do it myself.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I mean, on the kind of easy first blush answer is that he's not constitutionally eligible, right?
Sure.
But,
cross what is the Constitution? Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah,
you can disrupt
that.
Like, why couldn't
sure
Why couldn't the Constitution be disrupted?
Right. I think if he wanted to, he could very easily have like we'll cross that bridge when we come to a sort of approach. It seems to me, we'll see how these 4 years go, right? But I would lean toward thinking, I think, that it is a little bit more in keeping with Elon's view of politics and kind of his own sort of heroic vision of himself, that he is sort of this outside channeler of sort of inchoate forces that is not, he doesn't want access to the actual powers of the presidency because he doesn't think that is what his secret sauce is. He thinks his secret sauce is in kind of being a conduit for sort of popular intention, and the power of sort of tech, and specifically tech he controls, to kind of channel that and use that to indirectly or directly kind of force the people who do have the kind of titles and the desks and things like that to kind of bend the knee. And I think he sees himself as sort of that more like swashbuckling outside figure. But he is currently potentially testing the outside limits of that theory, right? Because he has done a lot to get Trump elected. He has really punched his ticket and does control a lot of popular will and does have that position close to the president and gave him $100 bazillion to help him win, such that I think he probably does feel very entitled now to wield a great deal of influence. And if a guy like Steve Bannon can just kind of come around the corner and cut him off at the knees just because he's better at actually, connecting with people and is not like totally kind of, that's the weird thing about Elon, right? Is like he has this parasocial relationship with all of these like little fans of his, but he as a human being really does not connect with other human beings very well. Steve Bannon is very personable and kind of charming and gregarious. So I do think like if Elon did kind of get kicked to the curb here, it would have a pretty devastating impact on that kind of theory of outside leadership that I was just sort of sketching out. And who knows what he would do after that? I mean, you could see it. You could see it.
Here's the thing about Elon. He is a takeover artist. He gets interested in something. He doesn't often start his own thing. He just goes and takes things over, like with Tesla. I don't know about SpaceX. I feel like he bought SpaceX, but I don't quote me on that. This is just YouTube. We're thinking out loud. With Twitter, right? He got interested in it and couldn't do what he wanted to do from only owning 9%, so he went and bought the thing. I could see a world in which 4 years of him just fixating on power and the United States government, he can't scratch the itch that he really has there. And he just decides, well, in his mumbly way. And again, not a prediction, but a long shot, like 100 to 1, is that at some point Elon starts toying with the idea of, well, why couldn't I just own the United States? I own everything else. And I'm brilliant. God help us. Andrew, thanks for sitting in on this. Guys, hit like, hit subscribe, come follow the channel. We'll see you later. Good luck, America.